matter experts, Judy Foster, to teach us more about fixed assets. Go ahead, Judy.
Thanks, Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. So today what we're going to cover is we're going to cover some of the high points of fixed assets. We're not going to dig deep into detail about how you do this transaction or that transaction. I just want to show you some of the things that can really make your life easier by using fixed assets within GP, because then you have everything all in one system. So you're not doing journal entries where you've got to go back and forth between FAS and GP and worry about journal entries. You've got all the detail. Sorry, my screen went to sleep on me. I'll have to keep that going so it doesn't do that. So let's go ahead and just get started. The couple of the biggest things to start with is you have the ability in GP to be able to take a transaction from its inception. So whether it starts as a payables transaction or whether it starts as a purchase order, you can take all of that information and have that fall into fixed assets for you, so you can use that information to actually create your asset. And without going really deep into detail, if you're using payables, it's done just with a GL account. So you would have what we call a trigger account, and I'll show you that part when we get back over on the fixed asset side. But if you're using purchase orders, when you go to do the intermatch, sorry, not the intermatch, it's the receiving. When you go to do the receivings transaction entry, and if you go to the line item for a detail, I've got to close that window first. I must have it open already. So let's see here if we can get to it. I must have it up down here, sorry. There it is. When you're on the receivings line, you open up the little arrow that points to the right, and I'll move this down so that I can show you. So when you click on your line and you click this blue arrow over here just before it says quantity shipped, that's going to open up your receivings item detail entry screen. Right over here, this little checkbox, capital item, that will, when you finish this transaction and you post this transaction, that's going to take the details from this line item and put it out into fixed assets, waiting for you to add that asset. So now let's go ahead and jump back into fixed assets. Let's get rid of these. These on the background out of the way. And we're going to go back into financial, and we're going to go to fixed assets. So then when you come into fixed assets and you're ready to start adding your assets, you're going to come under the financial section down under fixed assets, and you're going to click on the general card. When you click on this general card, you've got two ways to add those pieces of information in as assets. You can do it by using the drop-down list, and this will show you every transaction. And I entered some specifically for our examples today. So these are like 3 different assets that you would possibly use for a conference room. So you'll see a table and a credenza and some chairs that we're going to talk a little bit about today using those transactions. So I could certainly just click one of these, and it'll pull the information in for me quickly. I think I double-clicked it. Or I hit enter, something. Let's see what we did. There we go. So here it is. We have to give it a class ID, and we can have this automatically auto number for us as well. So here's an asset. If I say, oops, I don't want this, I can just clear this screen, and it will be back in the list for me to choose at a later time. So you'll see that those are there. The other way that you can do it is if you've done it from a purchase order, you can click on purchase. And here you're going to see all of the transactions that you have available to be ready to enter as an asset. You can click them by simply marking the box over here. The nice part about this is maybe you had more than one asset that you wanted, or more than one piece of equipment or transaction that you wanted to add in as one asset. So if we wanted to combine all of our conference room information and put it in as one big asset, we certainly could do that by simply marking all 3 boxes. And then that would pull all of that information in. So if I did that, excuse me, and then it's going to allow you to pull all of that information back in when you tell it that's what you want to do. So either way, we can pull them in. So let's go back here and let's get one of these, and I'll show you what we can do. So let's use this one. This is where I had bought a computer system as an example. So then we're going to give it our class. So we're going to say our computer equipment. And we can add our asset ID in here. If we gave this a different asset ID or a different class and it had an auto add number, it would default the number in. So you can name these assets whatever you want to. Even if you're auto numbering them, you can set them to be what it is. So maybe you wanted to start it with something like 2016 so that you know it's an asset that you bought in 2016. And we already know that it's computer based on the class. And then you could just start with a 000001 as an example. So there's a lot of things you can do with your asset numbering structure, and you can control what that is. And like I said, from the class ID, you can actually set that up for each different group that you have, or each different class that you have. And then you'll put in your, oh, sorry, you can't use hyphens, you have to use a space. I forget that every time. I apologize about that. Doesn't like hyphens in the ID. And then you would just say new computer system. And then if you wanted to add a master asset ID, you could do that as well. Where this comes in handy is if you had those 3 pieces of equipment that you were bringing in that were conference room, and you had the credenza, the chairs, and the table, you could give them a master ID all the same, and then each one would have its own unique asset ID so that you could control those or report on those all together all at once. Notice also that we have an extended description and a short name that you can use, and you can use those to keep any information that you need that's not listed here so far. And then we have our type, and obviously these would be new because we just purchased them, what type of property they are, and then based on the class that you pull in, it's going to pull in your account group for you. And then over here, it's going to show you your acquisition information. So it's going to pull in the date of the transaction, and notice that the date that came in is the 11th because that was the date that I actually created the transaction in the system. And it's going to bring in my acquisition cost. The blue arrow is going to allow you to go back and see the information. Excuse me. So you can actually see the information here. You can drill back right here. It's going to take you right back into Payables, and you can see that transaction that actually came and brought that transaction into fixed assets. So you do have true drill back capability. Now if we wanted to break this one up into separate assets, maybe we wanted to break out the monitor and the CPU and that separately, we could do that by simply changing our acquisition cost here. So we want to put the server in as one asset. We could do that. When we change this, then it's going to let us do that. I'll tell it OK here. And now you'll see that that asset would be $40,000. And if I save that, then you would be able to go back in your purchases and see that the rest of the $18,000 to make the $58,000 is still out there waiting to be added in for another asset. So without going through all of the fields that you have to, obviously quantity, anything in red is a required field, so you have to fill those in. You have physical locations, you have asset labels. This would be where you would put your label ID with the little metal labels that you sometimes see on the fixed assets, or the paper labels, whatever you have or your organization uses to identify an asset within your system. We have structure ID, which just basically it's a lookup field, but that's something that you can determine what you want to use that for. And then the custodian would be, if you're running payroll, you can assign the asset to an actual employee. Or if you have your employees set up in the payroll cards, even if you're not running payroll, then you could assign that asset to a specific employee. Under the manufacturer's name, you would also be able to record other additional information. So here's where you could record your serial number, your warranty number, serial number, model number, and your warranty date on those fields. And then your last maintenance date, if you're keeping track of that. And then the date added is going to automatically be populated based on the date that the asset was added into fixed assets, not the date that it was placed in service. The placed in service date is going to come in on your book cards, and that's where you're going to record all of the information for your depreciation. So that is basically the asset card. Location is just a location within you have two different pieces of, so you could say like the city and the state, or the building and the room number. You can use those for whatever information you want to use those for in your organization. So once you've added your asset, let's see, what else do I need here to get? I think we can actually add this one, so we can save this. So once I save this, there's a little checkbox down here at the bottom, auto add book information. When I save that, then that's going to ask me which book or books I want to add this into. So notice that you can have multiple books. Internal would typically be the book that you would use, and you can name these books whatever you want to call them. Internal in my system is the one that I use to report back to General Ledger. You can only have one book report to General Ledger, but you can have multiple books where you record depreciation and information separately for reporting purposes. Pardon me. So I'm going to tell it that I want to add it to all books and tell it OK. And recalculate was automatically set. You wouldn't have anything to change, so you just leave it for the default. And now I've got a go-to button, so this can take me from my general card to my accounts. So here I can see the GL accounts that came in. Notice I didn't have to type them all in. They came in from my class that I had set up on my asset. And then here's my clearing account that I was talking about. So when I did my payables transaction, it put it through a clearing account. When I add this asset into fixed assets, it's going to actually offset this clearing account, and the other side of it will be, it'll be setting up the asset as a fixed asset on your balance sheet. So then we can do a go-to here as well and go look at our book. So if I call up my internal book, this would be the one where you're adding the fixed assets, or where you're recording your general ledger depreciation. So it brought in all the information from the card that it needs to. It defaulted from the book setup, book class setup, that it's a straight line and it's a full period with no switch. Although if I needed to change any of this information, I certainly could. In addition to doing regular out-of-the-box assets, you can do other things in here as well. So you can put things into fixed assets, like you could put loan amortizations in here, because you can use amortization instead of using depreciation. So there's a lot of things that you can do with fixed assets other than just straight out fixed assets. But all of these fields, you can change the information on them, so you can set your life. If it needs to be different than what came in as a default, you could certainly change that. If you find down the road that, whoops, you put this in at 5 years and it should have been 3 years or 10 years, whichever way it goes, because maybe somebody just put the wrong thing or they put the wrong class on it initially so that it had the wrong information, you can come back and change this information. GP has the ability to go back and recalculate. If you change any of your depreciation sensitive fields, which would be something like your life, your placed in service date, your dollar amount, your depreciation method as an example, then when you do that and you go to save this record, it's going to force you to recalculate your depreciation. And so you have 3 choices. You can recalculate it, meaning recalculate from this point going forward, make all my changes from now forward, don't change anything that I've already recorded. You can recalculate it for life, to go back to the beginning of the asset and recalculate it back out through, or you can recalculate it for the year. Now, regardless of which of those 3 you do, you're going to get a journal entry. Although if you do it for life or for the current year, it will still create your journal entry, but the journal entry is going to be posted in the GL in the month that you do or you record that change for. Although in the asset transactions, you will see it go back and we'll look at this in a little while, where you can actually see an asset and you can see the transactions for an asset. It would go back and recalculate it on the asset itself for the entire life or for year to date, whichever you had chosen. And so that's what happens with those. And then you have an ITC cost button down here as well. So if that's something that you need to use, you can use that as well. You've got your TEFRA information in there as well. So that is basically the book card. So we see if we wanted to look at another book, we'll save this. And then you can go through and you can use your arrow buttons down here because I added the 3 books. So I should be able to scroll through, cancel that, no I don't want to, can't scroll through there. Okay, so yeah, that's clear. All right, so let's call up, and we're on a different asset now because it scrolled through my assets, okay. All right, so let's go back out of here and let's do it a little different. So let's go back under cards and let's go to book. So here you can actually call up the asset itself. So if we put in our 2016, because that's what our asset started with, and we hit our lookup, it'll bring up our asset in the list. We can find that. And now I can actually choose which book I want to look at. So maybe now I want to look at federal. Choose that. There's that information. And clear that screen. And now I can also look at my AMT. So you see, you get the idea that you can have as many different books as you need. The depreciation method and information can be different on each one. And that's information that's really good for you for the assets. So from here, we can go to other information as well. So we have another card that's called insurance. This is where you can record information for each and every asset. Again, it's not required information, but you can record it. So you could say my insurance year is this, my value, my replacement cost, my reproduction cost, my depreciation, reproduction cost, my exclusion amount, and types. That's all information that by asset you can capture in the system. So if you can capture it, you can report on it. Again, with our go-to button, you see we can record lease information. So you can record leases in here. These can be non-depreciating assets. So when your auditors come in at the end of the year and they need all the lease information, you can capture that here in fixed assets. Even though you're not depreciating anything for it, you've got all the lease information here that they need for their audit purposes. So you can put in who's the lease company. What type of a lease is it? Is it a capital lease or an operating lease? What's your contract number? What's the payment amount? What's the interest rate? What's the end date? And remember, this is a card off of your main card, so you could still set the asset up as an asset card with a capital lease and then have that lease card filled out with it to enhance all the additional information. But yet in that case, you wouldn't necessarily have a book for it, or you could set up a book that was just called lease, and that would be the only book that you would put it in. And then you would be able to see that information as well. And then under Go-To, we also have user data. So these are user-defined fields. So you can set these up to capture and record any information that your organization deems is necessary for them to capture. Project number is just something that they've defaulted in. These can all be changed in setup. So you can change these labels. These are all going to be lookups where you can look up the data in there and choose an option. And then you have, down here, you have some dollar amount fields that you can capture information for as well. Notice on every screen that you see, it's going to show you the status of the asset. So it could be active, it could be retired. There's different statuses that you can have for them. So we're going to go look now at some of the other information. So you kind of get the idea how you can capture all of this information for your fixed assets, which is really good. So if we go now, and we're going to start looking at some of our transactions. So we'll go over here. And if we scroll down under fixed assets, So the different types of transactions that you can do is you can retire an asset, and you can retire them in full, or you can do a partial retirement. So this is what your retire screen was looking like. So if you're going to do a partial retirement, you can do it based on quantity or cost or a %. And then you can tell it what the cash proceeds and the non-cash proceeds and the expenses of the sale are. All of that information is going to get captured, and that's going to be a transaction that's recorded for the asset as well. You can undo a retirement. So if you retire an asset and you go, man, I chose the wrong one, you can go back and you can have it undo the retire of that asset, and it will put everything back to where it was. You can also transfer an asset. So you could move an asset from one location to another location so that you didn't have to go in and manually type everything. When you click on transfer, you call up your asset ID, and then you're going to just put in that you're moving it, the date you're moving it, where it's going from, and where it's going to. Well, it knows where it's at, so you're just putting in where you want to transfer it to. And then it will do that in the system, although that doesn't necessarily transfer it for the general ledger. You may have to watch that depending on how you do it. Intercompany transfer, if you're using multiple companies in GP, and this will create a GL transaction for you, you can transfer it from one company to another company. Now, the only company ID you have in here to choose is the one it's going to, because it already knows what company that you're in, that you're moving it from. And then you have the different fields that you can fill out along with all of the information. And then here you've got your spread options down here as well with your cash proceeds, your non-cash proceeds, and your expenses for that as well. So all really good information for you when you're working on it. Select assets is just where it gives you the ability to go in and select a group of assets, and they don't necessarily all have to be the same class. It can be pretty much just ad hoc reporting, so that you could choose a certain group of assets, and with those you could depreciate them, you could transfer them, you could do a lot of different types of transactions with that. You could report on them. So you could make a mass change. Maybe if you wanted to, you're moving an entire department's assets from one department to another, because maybe you broke out sales and marketing and you're going to have two different departments now. So you want to take a bunch of assets from sales and move it into the marketing department. You could use your select assets to select all of the appropriate assets and then do a mass change and take that selected asset group that you just created, and you could come in and you could change them to a different location or different physical location. And when you do that, it'll update the information for you. Then you click Apply Changes, and it'll take care of it. So again, today is not really a training, just kind of touching on some of the screens so that you can get a high-level overview of all of the information that's in here and available and what you can do with it. And then if we need to do further follow-up, we're more than happy to help in any way we can to get you what you need with your fixed assets. Okay, so mass retire. This gives you the ability to retire multiple assets all at once. So just like you can mass change, you can mass retire. And this would be, you'd give it your asset group. So again, you'd use your select assets to select a group of assets that you want to use. You'd come in here and you would select the group that you had set up, which I haven't set one up. But then you would put in the date and the retirement type and the code. Use your spread options here for what you want to do. Make sure your currency set at the proper currency if you're using multi-currency. Excuse me. Cash proceeds, non-cash proceeds, or expenses of the sale. And then you tell it to retire. And it will do that as well. Pardon me. All right. We can, so we talked about mass retire. We can mass transfer. So this would work the same way. Select the group that you created, what date you want them transferred, what physical location they're going from, what location they're going to. Did the structure ID change? If it did, you can put that in. If you're doing it just for one, you can look up a master asset ID as well. So anywhere you have a looking glass, you have a lookup. So your master asset ID is just going to be a numerical value. So when you start adding assets, it's going to start at 1 and it's just going to increment individually as it goes up. And that's what your master asset ID consists of. So if you never need to know in what order you added them, maybe you added an asset and you didn't realize until 5 or 6 months down the road that it was not in fixed assets and you added it later, you would be able to, if the auditors said to you, well, when was this really purchased, you'd be able to go back and look at your master ID and tell roughly when it was really purchased if you couldn't put your fingers on your payables transaction. Or if you hadn't recorded your payables transaction, added it from AP. If you added it from AP like we talked about in the beginning, you wouldn't have to worry about it. You could drill back and actually see the payables transaction and get the date from that. So back to the mass transfer, again, you can transfer with all this information, and then you would put the account group ID here, and it would populate the accounts for you, and then you would click on transfer, and they would be transferred. Okay.
I'm going to put everybody just on pause. If you could just hold on, there's some background noises coming through. I'm just going to put everyone on mute for 1 second. I'll take you off mute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we're ready to move on. Thank you about that, Kim. Okay, so that pretty much goes over the transactions that you can do for fixed assets. And I know some of you are probably saying, well, you didn't talk about depreciation, because depreciation isn't considered a transaction. It's part of your routines, because that's done on a monthly basis. So you go down to fixed assets. So in your course of your month end, you've got several things that you would need to do from a fixed asset standpoint. So the first thing you would want to do is you'd want to make sure that all your new assets are added. All of your assets that have been retired are recorded. So whether you disposed of it, whether you sold it, transferred it, whatever you did with it, we need to make sure that all those transactions are done before we go run our depreciation, so that all the assets are up to date before we do that. And that's what your transactions take care of, is all those other kinds of transactions. And then typically what I recommend, GP does create a journal entry for you, and it will post it over there when you tell it. But if you go through the month and you're putting all of your information in as it comes along, and at the end of the month you've got all your assets in, all your retirements in, now you run your depreciation, and then you do your posting to GL, you're going to get one huge journal entry that's going to go into GL, and it's going to be, if you're off something, it's going to be a little harder to find. So my recommendation typically is to be methodical about it and either do it group by group, or do it all your additions first, as an example. You don't have to do it in this specific order, but do all your additions first, do the posting for that, make sure that balances, then do all your retirements, make sure that balances and post that, and then go do your depreciation. And if you want to do your depreciation group by group, you can certainly do that as well. Because when you go in to run depreciation, you can do it by group, or you can just come in and you can tell it that you want to do it, leave this blank and do it for all of them, and put your internal book and click insert. And then you run this and it's going to run your depreciation for you. Okay? Now, you can run depreciation at any point in time. This just calculates the depreciation. This is not what creates the transaction in general ledger. What creates the transaction in general ledger, let's see if we can get down here, is the GL posting. So after you've run your depreciation, that screen back up. After you've run your depreciation, then you would come down and you've done all of your month end, or you've done the piece that you want to go ahead and post, you would do GL posting, and that's what's going to send all of the information in a journal entry in detail over to GP. Although you have the ability to tell it you want it to go in summary, I highly recommend you send your journal entry over in detail, because it's much easier to reconcile if you find that you're out of balance somewhere or something looks like it's gone awry. Projections, this would be where you would run your budget projections based on your assets and the depreciations that they have. So you can run these so that you can, for your budget purposes, update your budgets for the coming years. There is no automatic update for that, but it will print you the report, and then you can go in and update your budget in GL. You can depreciate one asset as well. So if you need to depreciate just one asset, instead of setting up a group for that one asset, using select assets, you could just go in and choose one and depreciate that. You can reverse depreciation on an asset. So if you've run depreciation, say through the end of August, and you actually put August in as a wrong date, you really wanted to depreciate it only through the end of July. If you go back for that asset and you run depreciation as of July 31st, it's going to set that depreciation back, and it will make that information, it will update all of the financial detail for that asset and show that appropriately for you as well. And any of your depreciation transactions will go into GL posting, although it'll go into the next posting. So the way the posting works is any depreciation sensitive fields that are processed from the last time you ran GL posting until the next time you run GL posting are going to be included in that journal entry. So it's not just about the transactions that you just did at the end of the month waiting to get ready. If you disposed of an asset in the middle of the month, it would pick that up as well. So you just have to be thoughtful and cognizant about how you're doing your postings if you want your journal entries to be for each type of transaction. So, but it certainly can be done, and it's not as difficult as it sometimes sounds. Purge transactions, so you have several different things that you can do here when an asset is old and needs to not be in the system anymore necessarily. So you could certainly summarize the information where you're just summarizing it up. It still stays there, but it's in summary form and not detail form. If they're really old, say like they're 15 years old and they've been depreciated and they're off the books and you just want to get them out of there, you can actually purge them, and you have the ability to tell them, you know, you want to purge anything prior to this date if it's retired, deleted, or even partially open. And it shows you when your last purge activity was as well. So you do have the ability to kind of clean up your fixed assets. Now, physical inventory, this is a nice little screen because we talked briefly about it on the asset card. So when we come in and look at this, this is where you could say for this physical location, it's going to give you a list of all of the assets that in GP are recorded for that location. You can have PIN numbers in there, and that can just be to record any information that you need or want. And then you can have a verified date. And then you can come in and you can mark these, and you can run reports, and you can say, okay, show me everything that's missing. So if you run this report, it's going to show you everything that doesn't have a recorded location. And then you can come in and you can update those so that everything stays recorded. So, and you can use this kind of for other things as well. If there's something specific that you need to use it for, certainly be happy to talk to you about anything, because there's a lot of these screens where even though it looks like you can do only this, you can sometimes use them for other things as well. And then we have reports, obviously, for our assets and our depreciation. So let's go back up here. And let's find our reports. And let's go down to the fixed assets section. So you have activity reports, you have comparison reports. Here's your depreciation report. So after you've run depreciation, you can come in and run the report so you can see all of your depreciation information. Here's where you can run, because remember we're under fixed assets, you can run an inventory report for fixed assets. Projections, these would be your budgets after you've run the projection, and then transaction reports here as well. So a lot of good reporting that you can get out of Great Plains. Even if there's not a report that gives you specifically the information that you want or that you need or that your auditors need, keep in mind that this is Great Plains. Great Plains is a SQL database. SSRS, SQL Reporting Services, is a fabulous tool, and it can be used to write, if the information is in Great Plains, you can use it to get information out. You also have smart lists. Smart lists can be written. They can include information other than what the default smart lists have. So that's all good information to keep in mind as well, to help you with all your reporting needs and processes that you do within the system. And that's not just true for fixed assets, that's true across the board, that you can use those tools as well. So we looked at our reports, and then under utilities, there's a few things under here. You probably won't come here very much, but initially if you wanted to import your assets, there's an asset tool in here that you could use. This is where you would set up your acres table, and that's the screen that we looked at early on. Here's where you can come in and clear data if you need to. You can delete transactions if you need to. Maybe you add something in as an asset and find out that, well, it really didn't qualify as an asset. It shouldn't have been set up. You could actually go in and purge that. And then you can purge purchasing transactions. So along the same thoughts, if you hadn't added it as a fixed asset yet, but you had put it through either the trigger account or as a capital expense when you received it, so now it's sitting out in your list, you can go purge those transactions and get rid of the ones that shouldn't be there. And then you have a reconcile function here as well that's available. So let's go back. We've got a few minutes left. Let's go back and look at some of the setup information. Although this is very important information, I wanted you to see more of the nuts and bolts of it rather than just the setup stuff first. That's why I'm saving this for last. So typically where you want to start on your setup, here's the information where you can say, I'm in the wrong spot. Sorry about that. Need to go down to fixed assets. Not there. So that didn't look right. All right, so where you want to start with this is under company. So you're going to come in and you're going to give it your corporate book. Whatever you put as your corporate book, this is the asset table that's going to, or the book that's going to report to the GL. That's how Great Plains determines which of the books that you have listed is going to interface and interact with GL, and that's the only book that's going to interact automatically with GL. Here's where you can tell it to auto-generate a next number. So this is just the default next number. For each book class, you can set a different auto number if you want to as well. And then these are just overall settings. So these are your options. Require asset accounts, I highly recommend that you mark that, because if you don't mark that, then you're going to get errors when you try and run depreciation or when you try and run assets if somebody hasn't automatically or hasn't put the proper account numbers in when they've added the assets into the system. The auto add book information, that's the little screen that popped up once I saved my asset and asked me did I want to auto add it to the books. So if you mark that, it will let you auto add it in the books. And then this is where you can use the auto data format. You can default an asset label from your asset ID. So if the number on your little tag that you put on the asset and the number that you use as your asset in the system are the same, you can have that information default in so you only have to type it once. We talked about the custodian on the asset card where I said if you have your employees set up in GP payroll cards, whether you're running payroll or not, you could have them listed as a custodian on the asset, so you could like assign it to that employee. If you mark this box, then it's going to validate it and make sure that it's a truly an active employee in the system before it'll let you assign that custodian to an asset. Reset history in detail. So if you want to be able to do that, you can mark that box as well. And then post in detail. We talked about that when you run your depreciation and you're doing your GL posting. This will send the journal entry over to GL transaction by transaction instead of just a summarized journal entry by account, which I highly recommend this. It comes in very handy when you're trying to reconcile if you're out of balance. And then we talked about purchasing options at the very beginning where you can have it pull in the information from payables and or from when you're receiving items through purchasing. So post payables management through to fixed assets, mark that, and that's automatically going to happen. And that's going to be based on the GL account number. It has to be set up as a trigger account. And I can show you real quickly where that happens. And then post POP through fixed assets. Here you have two choices. So you could say by account, and you could use the same GL account number you used for this, or you could say by receipt line. And that's the way I had it set up in my purchasing, where they marked the little capital box. When you're dealing with purchasing, sometimes it's easier to just give them a box to check than it is to have them remember a specific GL account number that an item has to be coded to. And then do you want to include the matching invoices? Well, if you're doing anything from here, you typically would want your invoices to come over so that you could drill back and see them as well. And then delete purchasing transactions immediately. What that does is once you add that asset in, once that asset's created from that list, then you save it, it's going to take it out of the list so it's no longer there. You don't have to go then manually purge them. And then here's some default accounts, and this is where you would set up your user-defined labels. So you would just come in and change your labels. Not only can you change your labels, you can change the format of what these different fields look like. So you'll notice that you have some different options here. And if we come down further, you'll see you can make this one be like a telephone number as an example. So there's different things that you can do. And then here you can have the different ways they're displayed as well. So you can have more decimal places, etc. And then do you want to say this is valid data, and you want to list the values. So you have these checkboxes that you can mark. If you mark one of these checkboxes, this is where you create your drop-down list. So this is where you'd add your list of values that you would see as a lookup. If you don't mark this, then it's just a free-form text field where you could just type information into the field itself. Okay, so I think that's going to take us, I'm not going to save my changes here, pretty much through that. We will touch real briefly on the book class setup. So we talked about books. So you know your books could be AMT, they could be GL, they can be financial, they can be loan, they can be whatever you need to name your different books. You can call them whatever you want to. Your classes, though, typically go with your different groupings. So automobiles, buildings, computer equipment, furniture and fixtures, trucks. So however you want to set your classifications up, you can control what you call them. And then you can say, here's my description and here's my class ID. And typically this is just a short nomenclature for what your description is. And then you would say, for this book, for this class, computer is an example, here's what my default is for my depreciation information. So when you add that asset and you say it's in my internal book and it's in my class of computer, when it creates that book record for the internal book, it says, okay, you told me you want it to default with straight line, full period, no switch, 5 years. No, it's not a luxury auto, there's no TEFRA for this, there's no special depreciation allowance, but yet I want it to automatically add into the book. So it knows, okay, as soon as I save that record and I tell it's internal, this is what's going to default in on that asset So you can have any combinations of these that you need to have for each book class combination. So, and you can change those. So. All right. So I think with that, Kim, I'm ready to open it up for questions. If anybody has questions, because we still have a little bit of time left.
All right. So on the right-hand side, I can still hear that breather. I don't know what to do about that, but it is what it is. On the right-hand side, you're going to see the question area. So let's type in any questions that you'd like to ask Judy, and I do have one here. And it says, when I open my Assistant General Information card, the purchases option is not there. Is this something that just has to be turned on?
Yep. So you would go in and you would set up under your company setup like I showed you, where you'd make sure you mark those. And then if you're using a trigger account, this trigger account has to be set up. So you would come in, and when you look here, I have assigned marked. And again, I chose purchasing posting options. I'm sorry. You'd choose that when you'd come in here. And if you look at just assigned and you look in the lookup, if there's nothing here, that means that it hasn't been associated yet with as a posting account. So you would go to all, choose your account out of your regular chart of accounts, pull it in here. Once you save that, then you'll be able to look that up here. But if this piece isn't set, then it's not going to work. Even though you have the account set up in the GL, if you haven't populated this and you don't have that set for class, then you can not do it. So that may be your problem. But if you look at that and that doesn't work and you want to call me, should I give my information now, Kim, or are we going to post it, or what do you want me to do?
Well, let's do that at the very end. We got another question in the queue here as well.
Sure. Yep.
Could that be because I have not rolled forward 2015 is the follow-up question.
The reason the asset's not showing, is that what the question was?
Yeah, it's a follow-up from the last question.
If you can't add the asset in, it really doesn't have anything to do that you haven't rolled your year forward, because you could go in right now and you could put in an asset, and as long as you had the fiscal year set up, you could still set it up for any year. I think it has more to do.
There's a message from Lori before that. It says, I keep getting an error that says target date's fiscal year may not be greater than the current fiscal year. And then the follow-up was, is that because I haven't rolled over 2015?
So yes, that could be your problem.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Oh, okay. No other questions in the queue. And again, I do want to mention that fixed assets in most cases is a module that you already own through licensing. So it's a great way for you to keep track of this, not keep it on a spreadsheet and so forth. So it's something great for you to consider. And Judy's one of our consultants that can help you on that. I also want to mention that there is a classroom training on September 15th. In the Houston office. And so if you are in that neck of the woods, then you could also consider going to a classroom and having that classroom training for the day. So go take a look at our website for that information, and keep an eye out on what classroom trainings we have. And of course, at any time, we do personalized training as well, which is probably more typical. Judy, I think you did a great job. Thank you so much for giving us an overview of the solution. Any last words? Why don't you bring up your contact information in case people want to contact you directly. I'm getting a few thank yous over here in the question area, but let's bring up your contact information.
Yep, hang on. Let me go find it real quick. I didn't have that handy. I stuck that away.
Okay.
Let me just find it real quick here, because I did have it on the PowerPoint, but.
And of course, if you always, have that default, you can always email userexperiences@interdynbmi.com. That's me, and I'll make sure that I get it to the appropriate person as well. Or support. Got a lot of people here ready to help you.
All right. So can't get it full screen, Kim.
Okay. Well, I bet it's Judy.Foster, F-O-S-T-E-R.
I got it here. I'll just pull it over
There we
this way.
go. All right.
That works.
At 9 BMI, and here's her phone number. Very, very good. Thank you, Judy. Great job. That was awesome. And thank you, everybody, for your time. Again, come on back for some more